This is Twisted Passages with award-winning author Marie Sutro. Now, let's take a deep dive into the dark world of psychological thrillers and meet the authors who created them.
Hello, and welcome to Twisted Passages. I'm your host, Marie Sutro, and today we'll be talking to author Cate Quinn about her new release, The Clinic. Welcome, Cate.
Thank you so much for having me.
I am so excited that you're here today. I have to say, from the very beginning, those who are listening on podcast form and not watching us on YouTube do not get the benefit of looking at your gorgeous, gorgeous cover. Why don't we delve in and start off for those who haven't heard about the clinic yet? Can you give a little background about what the story is about?
Sure. So the clinic is a murder mystery set in a luxurious rehab in a remote part of the country. Fun fact about that gorgeous cover, which shows a kind of spooky looking but grand house just in the Seattle sort of region of the country. I wrote with that house kind of in mind, never told anybody. And then the graphic designer somehow used that house for the cover. So that was really exciting and kind of felt a little bit like fate. But the book itself is kind of was based on my own experience of being in rehab, which did take place in a kind of slightly spooky old house. So I drew on that quite heavily, and wrote this sort of slightly creepy, sinister murder mystery, I guess, with a twist at the end.
It is sinister and amazing, amazing murder mystery. So we start off with your main character, Meg, right? And it's her sister who has passed away at the rehab facility that draws her in, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And it's really interesting. I was fascinated from the beginning that you took a two point of view approach. You give us Meg, but you also give us Kara. Can you tell us a little bit about the choice to have the two points of view and what we get out of each of them?
So I always really enjoy having different points of view, particularly with women, because I think it's really interesting to see how people can have quite a different perception of one another depending on their own characteristics. So the character of Cara, she is a manager at the clinic. She's very efficient. She, in her own way, is very rule abiding. She has had a slight incident in her own past. A sort of romance went wrong that ended up on going viral on social media. So she's quite guarded, but ultimately she's very good at doing her job, and she is a rules kind of person. And I wanted to give people a bit of insight into how the rehab was being run and into the kind of strings behind that kind of thing. But I also wanted to have someone who could really contrast with Meg, who is the main character, and I guess really get under her skin a bit, because the kind of person Meg is, who is very maverick, very impulsive. She's a brave kind of person. Really does not like Cara when she checks into the clinic, not at all. And interestingly, I think that kind of fed through. Like quite a few readers seem to have also taken against Cara, I think, on Meg's kind of prediction there.
Well, I loved both of the women, and I loved that they were both extremely strong female characters. And that play with POV was so much fun, because we would hear it from Meg's perspective, and then we'd hear Cara's thoughts on it afterwards. And so it was great to see. I think that just comes back to all of us and our own self-awareness, that we think we're projecting one thing and maybe we come off totally different to other people.
Right, absolutely.
That setting, have you been up to the Pacific Northwest much?
Yeah, I have. I've spent some time there, and it was a location that just really the rehab I was in personally was in the UK, but it was in this kind of quite spooky old building with a lot of carved wood, and it had a kind of medical centre sort of welded on, really. So it had the modern and the new, which is a lot like the clinic I write in the book. But I also kind of wanted to give a sense of scene and location, and where better in the whole of the country than that sort of slightly misty southwest, to kind of take us to this slightly sinister facility. I just thought it was the perfect place.
I did too, and I was so captivated. It was so cinematic, the way that you would describe, where it was located, some of the weather patterns which come into play as well. It really had that Agatha Christie feel of just the amazing location that we all want to read about, but we don't want to go to, at least not in that context.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a great part of the country to go exploring, right? But I'm not sure you'd want to be in a spooky old house with the mist and the sea wind kind of like buffering you. Yeah, it's a spooky experience.
The great thing about it though is, even the setting, they always say ideally your setting becomes a character. It really mimics what's going on for some of these characters who are going through rehab. And you really give us an amazing cast of characters. All of them were so real. I feel like I'm going to turn on TV and see one of these celebrities tomorrow and know, or social media and say, oh, there's Dex, or, whoever it is, Jade, or I don't know. It was so great to me. They all felt so real. Where does that come from in you, writing such good characters? Do you dig deep into the empathy side? Is it just impacts around you, people that you see, people you've come in contact with?
That is such an incredibly kind thing to say. So thank you very much. So those characters, a lot of them were actually based on people that I had encountered in rehab, and the rehab I was in, and I'm told this is not uncommon. I did have a scattering of people who I certainly would have recognised from TV or sort of media type careers. I have to kind of be careful how I describe them in case I accidentally give them away. So I kind of had fun sort of reimagining some of those characters in slightly different, but perhaps not too different celebrity guises. And that was an interesting thing to do. And I also kind of wanted, again, to pick people who I felt might have interesting interplays. And one of the things which is sort of kind of famously happens in rehab really is romances. So I kind of also wanted to make sure that I put in people who might have altercations and who might also fall for one another, not necessarily fall in love, but might fall for one another in a dramatic kind of way.
One of the things that you did that really was so moving, there was a line, and I'm sorry, I did not flag what page it was on, but Meg is in a conversation, and I want to say the line that it goes something like, in order to solve this, you're going to have to solve yourself. Because Meg has gone into rehab, obviously, to figure out what happened to her sister. But I don't know that she's really gone in with the right attitude. And she's
Right.
reminded of that idea. Um, that was extremely powerful, I thought, an extremely powerful scene, and an extremely powerful line. It really stood out to me.
Thank you. I thought, I mean, I'm always really interested in the layers at the heart of people and characters. And Meg is sister to Haley, who dies in rehab. Perhaps unsurprisingly, they come from a troubled family. Meg, very much like myself, actually does not realize when she goes in that she has an addiction problem. I personally obviously did realize when I went into rehab that I had an addiction problem, but it took me a very long time. Meg at this point does not realize, does not really know, doesn't understand. So she enters rehab believing that she is going to find out who killed her sister, because she finds her sister has, or she is told her sister commits suicide. She refuses to believe this, just cannot see this about her sister correctly, as we discover. And but interestingly, what Meg doesn't realize is, in order to solve the mystery of why her sister died, she will need to unpick the layers of her own past and find the kind of secret childhood trauma which both of them have been covering up for most of their lives in different kind of ways.
And I thought that was a fascinating deep dive, that you didn't make us feel like we were sitting in a lecture hall listening to this stuff. It was woven seamlessly in, and it was so thought-provoking, was the idea that trauma informs so much of who we are, and that with addiction, it can be so directive in whether or not we end up in the throes of it. Can you talk a little bit about the concept, that idea that childhood trauma sits in you for a long time and you can't just shove it behind a door and slam the door and hope it'll go away?
Yes, so I should preface this by saying that I'm not a doctor or psychologist, so this is only my layperson's understanding. So any inaccuracy is my own. But from what I came to understand from being in rehab was that at the heart of addictive behaviors, and that can be drug use, that can be work addiction, that can be any number of behaviors, is really a human being striving to distract themselves from some painful feelings that they are unable to confront or work through. And so the theory goes, there will have been some traumatic or perhaps several traumatic incidents which have been so overwhelming to the person that the cognitive part, the thinking part of their brain has just shut down. And that traumatic event has almost got locked in the physical body, in the spinal cord, where it kind of resides, thinking it's going to keep you alive by looking out for future threats of a similar kind. But it has no sense of time and space. It can't understand the threats past. And unless you are able to process this sort of physically trapped trauma in your body, then you are going to keep being bothered by feelings of anxiety, feelings of threat, uncomfortable feelings, which are just going to push you again into the arms of some distracting behavior. So there are ways to process this, and that commonly talking is seen as the way. But obviously, that's, you have to first remember to talk about it, what your trauma was. So that's a little bit of progress I think that's happening with the psychological world at the moment. How do we access forgotten trauma, if you will, and talk about it?
And I do think it's just, even in my lifetime, I can say we've gotten so much better, I think, as human beings at understanding that it's okay to talk about things. Prior generations, I think, were definitely tighter lipped. And there was an attitude that, again, if you do just shove it in the closet, then you can keep steaming forward and that's all that matters, not realizing that stuff's like acid on your tracks eating away, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think particularly for men, I think it would almost be, don't embarrass everybody by talking about it and appearing vulnerable.
Right. That was another issue that I thought was brilliantly revealed. There was a lot of probing, I thought, that you did that was really, really brilliant. You probed around ethics and morality and how we kind of define our own ethics and morality, how we justify things to ourselves. And I don't think that's something that's unique to addicts. I think all of us do that all the time. Looking at morality and ethics, do you think that it's okay sometimes to bend your comfort level? I'm thinking of certain characters in the book that perhaps bend their moral compass and push it in certain ways that they're not comfortable with, because of perhaps an ends justifies the means type of an approach. Do you think that's ever okay, or do you think we should stay away completely?
Are you thinking about kind of treatment when we come to treating people
Yes,
for their addiction? Should we force them into uncomfortable places? Oh,
exactly.
that's such a good question. That's such a good question. I mean, I suppose it would be so personal to the relationship between the two individuals in question. So I'm thinking, I mean, I have two kids, and there would be times when, with my extensive knowledge of my kids, at least I hope extensive knowledge of my kids, I'm on the side of push them a little bit to do things that they might otherwise be afraid of, not to overwhelm them and make them fearful, but just, oh, you're anxious about going to this party. We're not going to run away from the party. We're going to go in and do it. But that's my very nurturing relationship with my children. So I guess it must come down to that. I think it would have to depend on who was doing what to whom and the trust involved, I suppose, which is a bit of a non-answer, isn't it? But
No, I
but
think it's actually a really good answer. And I think that the parent-child role is a really great example of that, because I think, there's that old expression that life is lived on the edge of your comfort zone, and the edge of your comfort zone is not a happy place to be. And being able to push through, whether it's, something as simple as riding a roller coaster, or taking a job in perhaps a field that you're not certain if you can be successful in, whatever it is for you. I think maybe that role of a nurturing parent and is an archetypal role we should look to, for getting to the right places for ourselves.
Right, and I think that's the ideal therapeutic relationship, isn't it? And particularly that often would supplement some aspects of one's childhood that you might be missing and might have led you to seek the therapy in the first place.
With the idea of ethics and morals, there was also a lot of, and I imagine this goes on a lot through rehab, looking at shame and how shame becomes a barrier for progress. Some people think, well, shame is good because it makes us aware of our behavior and prohibits us from continuing down negative paths. But it also creates walls and traps us, doesn't it?
I think it absolutely does. And one of the things that I found about rehab that was incredibly powerful that I hadn't expected at all was the power of that group situation to shine a light on how much your shame does keep you trapped, and also to give you a mirror as to how other people see you, when you are attempting to move through a difficult admission. Or I remember really clearly in the group they make you do, your first step is you have to essentially sort of admit your worst deeds, really, or your sort of most awful, shocking addiction event. And the one of our fellow addicts in the group, this was before it was my turn to do mine, and he read his out. I think it might have even been my first group session. And I'm not going to go into the details of what he admitted to, but if anyone else had told you, it would have sounded awful and you would have thought he was an awful person. But seeing him talk through it and his shame, his grief, and his guilt, made you realize just how much people would see you making the same admission. None of us thought anything other than he was a brilliant, brave person, trying to do the best with the pain that he was struggling with. So I think, shame is restrictive in that regard, because it stops you from talking about the things that once you've talked about them, you realize actually no one really minds the way that you mind. And I always kind of say to my kids, like, if you're embarrassed about something, tell 3 people, because by the time you get to the third, it's kind of just a funny story. And I have some brilliant stories, my most embarrassing, not necessarily shameful, but my most embarrassing things that now I sort of like party jokes, but at the time I was mortified.
Yeah, and it's kind of like that those teenage years for us, right? Where whatever it is going to end our lives, and we can't possibly see that we could wake up the next morning and face it. And now we look back and did that even happen? If somebody tells you it happened, okay, I guess it did. I don't remember. But yeah, and those therapy sessions that you created, not only do we have this amazing mystery, which I was hooked until the very end. Usually, I mean, I've been reading mysteries since I was, Nancy Drew and Encyclopedia Brown as a child. Yes, yes. And, I've been obsessed, even Scooby-Doo, the cartoon with the dog solving. Well, then you understand, Kate, you get it. And
yes.
I have to say, you had me the whole time. Was it this person? Was it that person? What's going on? I had no idea. Everybody was plausible and completely believable. And it was so exciting. And like you said, the spooky vibe, just one of the best stories that I've read in a long time. Absolutely adored it. And through it all is this beauty that's in this dark place with this dark crime that's been committed, that this person has died, or we're not sure exactly. Meg is not exactly sure of the circumstances, which is why she goes to investigate. In the middle of all that is profound beauty. And when you were just talking about therapy sessions, you created multiple therapy sessions in the book that we as the readers get to participate in. And there's one in particular where a character is sharing their shame and their story, and the response that the group has to them, the realism of human compassion and understanding was so beautiful that, I mean, I was ready to cry over the beauty of that moment. So thank you for that. Knowing that there's human beings out there that can sit back and listen without judgment was a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I think, the thing about those group sessions, and it's in all of us. I think any of us, all of us, listening to a person telling their story, and particularly in a group context because it's so brave. You're making yourself so vulnerable that I think all of us respect and appreciate that at really quite an innate, quite visceral level.
It was absolutely beautiful, like I said. Um, where, if someone has not yet found your work, or if they have found it and they absolutely adore you, where is the best place for people to find you on social media, or is it your website?
So I do have a website which is catherinequinn.com, and that has some free scenes and some free for this book. I normally do a free scene or a free something for each book. So this book you can sign up and get a free. Actually, it's my personal journal from when I was in rehab. In terms of social media, I'm mainly on Instagram, so I'm under Cate Quinn author on Instagram. I'm still working out how to use Twitter. I go on Twitter. I do go on Twitter. I'm under the same handle on Twitter. And Facebook, I'm on Facebook, but not so much. But it's all the same handle, which is Cate Quinn author.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Kate, for joining us today. And thank you so, so very much for writing this book. I truly enjoyed it. And I recommend that everyone get out and get the clinic. You will go to the spooky place. You will find the amazing mystery, and you will grow along the way. What more could you ask for? Thank you again, and I hope to see you all next time on Twisted Passages.